Hello, squirrel listeners. We are on Chapter 8 of The Body in the Library. Sir Henry Clithering, as he passed through the lounge of the Majestic, hardly glanced at its occupants. His mind was preoccupied. Nevertheless, as is the way of life, something registered in his subconscious. It waited its time patiently. Sir Henry was wondering as he went upstairs just what had induced the sudden urgency of his friend's message. Conway Jefferson was not the type of man who sent urgent summonses to anyone. Something quite out of the usual must have occurred, decided Sir Henry. Jefferson wasted no time in beating about the bush. He said, "Glad you've come. Edwards, get Sir Henry a drink. Sit down, man. You've not heard anything, I suppose. Nothing in the papers yet?" Sir Henry shook his head, his curiosity aroused. "What's the matter?" "Murder's the matter. I'm concerned in it, and so are your friends, the Bantrys." "Arthur and Dolly Bantry?" Clithering sounded incredulous. "Yes, you see, the body was found in their house." Clearly and succinctly, Conway Jefferson ran through the facts. Sir Henry listened without interrupting. Both men were accustomed to grasping the gist of a matter. Sir Henry, during his term as Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, had been renowned for his quick grip on essentials. "It's an extraordinary business," he commented when the other had finished. "How did the Bantrys come into it, do you think?" "That's what worries me, you see, Henry. It looks to me as though possibly the fact that I know them might have been a bearing on the case. That's the only connection I can find." "Neither of them, I gather, ever saw the girl before. That's what they say, and there's no reason to disbelieve them. It's most unlikely they should know her." "Then isn't it possible that she was decoyed away and her body deliberately left in a house of friends of mine?" Clithering said, "I think that's far-fetched." "It's possible, though," persisted the other. "Yes, but unlikely." "What do you want me to do?" Conway Jefferson said bitterly. "I'm an invalid. I disguised the fact, refused to face it, but now it comes home to me. I can't go about as I'd like to, asking questions, looking into things. I've got to stay here meekly grateful for such scraps of information as the police are kind enough to dole out to me. Do you happen to know Melchett, by the way, the Chief Constable of Radfordshire?" "Yes, I've met him." Something stirred in Sir Henry's brain, a face and figure noted unseeingly as he passed through the lounge. A straight-backed old lady whose face was familiar. It linked up with the last time he had seen Melchett. He said, "Do you mean you want me to be a kind of amateur sleuth? That's not my line." Jefferson said, "You're not an amateur, that's just it. I'm not a professional anymore. I'm on the retired list now." Jefferson said, "That simplifies matters. You mean that if I were still at Scotland Yard, I couldn't butt in?" "That's perfectly true." "As it is," said Jefferson, "your experience qualifies you to take an interest in the case, and any cooperation you offer will be welcomed." Clithering said slowly, Etiquette permits, I agree, but what do you really want, Conway? To find out who killed this girl?" "Just that." "You've no idea yourself?" "None whatever." Sir Henry said slowly, "You probably won't believe me, but you've got an expert at solving mysteries sitting downstairs in the lounge at this minute. Someone who's better than I am at it, and who, in all probability, may have some local dope." "What are you talking about?" "Downstairs in the lounge, by the third pillar from the left, there sits an old lady with a sweet, placid, spinsterish face, and a mind that has plumbed the depths of human iniquity and taken it as all in a day's work. Her name's—" "Guess who?" "Miss Marple." She comes from the village of St. Mary Mead, which is 1.5 miles from Gossington. She's a friend of the Bantrys, and where crime is concerned, she's the goods, Conway." Jefferson stared at him with thick puckered brows. He said heavily, "You're joking." "No, I'm not. You spoke of Melchett just now. The last time I saw Melchett there was a village tragedy. Girl supposed to have drowned herself. Police quite rightly suspected that it wasn't suicide but murder. They thought they knew who did it. Along to me comes old Miss Marple, fluttering and dithering. She's afraid, she says, they'll hang the wrong person. She's got no evidence, but she knows who did it. Hands me a piece of paper with a name written on it, and by God, Jefferson, she was right." Conway Jefferson's brows came down lower than ever. He grunted disbelievingly. "Woman's intuition, I suppose," he said skeptically. "No, she doesn't call it that. Specialized knowledge is her claim." "What does that mean?" "Well, you know, Jefferson, we use it in police work. We get a burglary and usually know pretty well who did it, of the regular crowd, that is. We know the sort of burglars who act in a particular sort of way. Miss Marple has an interesting, though occasionally trivial, series of parallels from village life." Jefferson said skeptically, "What is she likely to know about a girl who's been brought up in a theatrical Milieu and probably never been in a village in her life?" "I think," said Sir Henry, clithering firmly, "that she might have ideas." Miss Marple flushed with pleasure as Sir Henry bore down upon her. "Oh, Sir Henry, this is indeed a great piece of luck, meeting you here." Sir Henry was gallant. He said, "To me it's a great pleasure." Miss Marple murmured, flushing, "So kind of you. Are you staying here?" "Well, as a matter of fact, we are." "We?" Mrs. Bantry's here too." She looked at him sharply. "Have you heard yet?" "Yes, I can see you have. It is terrible, is it not?" What's Dolly Bantry doing here? Is her husband here too?" "No, naturally they both reacted quite differently. Colonel Bantry, poor man, just shuts himself up in his study or goes down to one of the farms when anything like this happens, like tortoises, you know. They draw their heads in and hope nobody will notice them. Dolly, of course, is quite different. Dolly, in fact," said Sir Henry, who knew his old friend fairly well, "is almost enjoying herself, eh?" "Well, yes, poor dear." "And she's brought you along to produce the rabbit's out of the hat for her," Miss Marple said composedly. Dolly thought that a change of scene would be a good thing, and she didn't want to come alone. She met his eye, and her own gently twinkled. "But of course your way of describing it is quite true. It's rather embarrassing for me because of course I am no use at all." "No ideas? No village parallels?" "I don't know very much about it all yet. I can remedy that, I think. I'm going to call you into consultation, Miss Marple." He gave her a brief recital of the course of events. Miss Marple listened with keen interest. "Poor Mr. Jefferson," she said. What a very sad story. These terrible accidents. To leave them alive, crippled, seems more cruel than if he had been killed too." "Yes, indeed. That's why all his friends admire him so much for the resolute way he's gone on, conquering pain and grief and physical disabilities." "Yes, it is splendid. The only thing I can't understand in this sudden outpouring of affection for this girl, she may, of course, have had some remarkable qualities." "Probably not," said Miss Marple placidly. "You don't think so?" "I don't think her qualities entered into it." Sir Henry said, "He isn't just a nasty old man, you know." No, Miss Marple got quite pink. I wasn't implying that for a minute. What I was trying to say was, very badly I know, that he was just looking for a nice bright girl to take his dead daughter's place. And then this girl saw her opportunity and played it for all she was worth. That sounds rather uncharitable, I know, but I have seen so many cases of the kind. The young maidservant at Mr. Harbottle's, for instance, a very ordinary girl, but quiet with nice manners. His sister was called away to nurse a dying relative, and when she got back, she found the girl completely above herself, sitting down in the drawing room, laughing and talking and not wearing her cap or apron. Miss Harbottle spoke to her very sharply, and the girl was impertinent, and then old Mr. Harbottle left her quite dumbfounded by saying that he thought she had kept house for him long enough and that he was making other arrangements. Such a scandal as it created in the village, but poor Miss Harbottle had to go and live most uncomfortably in rooms in Eastbourne. People said things, of course, but I believe there was no familiarity of any kind. It was simply that the old man found it much pleasanter to have a young, cheerful girl telling him how clever and amusing he was than have his sister continually pointing out his faults to him, even if she was a good economical manager. There was a moment's pause, and then Miss Marple resumed. And there was Mr. Badger, who had the chemist shop. Made a lot of fuss over the young lady who worked in his toilet section. Told his wife they must look on her as a daughter, and have her to live in the house. Mrs. Badger didn't see it that way at all. Sir Henry said if she'd only been a girl in his own rank of life, a friend's child. Miss Marple interrupted him. Oh, but that wouldn't have been nearly as satisfactory from his point of view. It's like King Cophetua and the beggar maid. If you're really rather a lonely, tired old man, and if perhaps your own family have been neglecting you. She paused for a second. Well, to befriend someone who will be overwhelmed with your magnificence. To put it rather melodramatically, but I hope you see what I mean. Well, that's much more interesting. It makes you feel a much greater person. A beneficent monarch. The recipient is more likely to be dazzled, and that, of course, is a pleasant feeling for you. She paused and said, Mr. Badger, bought the girl in his shop some really fantastic presents. A diamond bracelet and a most expensive radio gramophone. Took out a lot of his savings to do so. However, Mrs. Badger, who was a much more astute woman than poor Miss Harbottle, marriage, of course, helps, took the trouble to find out a few things, and when Mr. Badger discovered that the girl was carrying on with a very undesirable young man connected with the race courses and had actually pawned the bracelet to give him the money, well, he was completely disgusted, and the affair passed over quite safely, and he gave Mrs. Badger a diamond ring the following Christmas. Her pleasant, shrewd eyes met Sir Henry's. He wondered if what she'd been saying was intended as a hint. He said, Are you suggesting that if there had been a young man in Ruby Keane's life, my friend's attitude towards her might have been altered? It probably would, I dare say in a year or two he might have liked to arrange for her marriage himself, though more likely he wouldn't. Gentlemen are usually rather selfish, but I certainly think that if Ruby Keene had had a young man, she'd have been careful to keep very quiet about it. And the young man might have resisted that. I suppose that's the most plausible solution. It struck me, that her cousin, the young woman who was at Gossington this morning, looked definitely angry with the dead girl. What you've told me explains why. No doubt she was looking forward to doing very well out of the business. Rather a cold-blooded character, in fact. That's too harsh a judgment, perhaps. The poor thing has had to earn her living, and you can't expect her to sentimentalize because a well-to-do man and woman, as you have described Mr. Gaskell and Mrs. Jefferson, are going to be done out of a further large sum of money to which they have really no particular moral right. I should say Miss Turner was a hard-headed, ambitious young woman with a good temper and considerable something in French. A little, added Miss Marple, like Jessie Golden, the baker's daughter. What happened to her? Asked Sir Henry. She trained as a nursery governess and married the son of the house, who was home on leave from India. Made him a very good wife, I believe. Sir Henry pulled himself clear of these fascinating side issues and said, "Is there any reason, do you think, why my friend Conway Jefferson should suddenly have depended upon this Cophetua complex, if you like to call it?" There might have been. In what way? Miss Marple said, hesitating a little. I should think, it's only a suggestion, of course, that perhaps his son-in-law and daughter-in-law might have wanted to get married again. Surely he couldn't have objected to that. Hang on. Not too much more. Oh, no, not objected, but you see, you must look at it from his point of view. He had a terrible shock and loss. So had they. The three bereaved people live together, and the link between them is the loss they have all sustained. But time, as my dear mother used to say, is a great healer. Mr. Gaskell and Mrs. Jefferson are young. Without knowing it themselves, they may have begun to feel restless, to resent the bonds that tied them to their past sorrow, and so, feeling like that, old Mr. Jefferson would have become conscious of a sudden lack of sympathy without knowing the cause. It's usually that. Gentlemen so easily feel neglected. With Mr. Harbottle, it was Miss Harbottle going away. And with the Badgers, it was Mrs. Badger taking such an interest in spiritualism and always going out to seances. I must say, said Sir Henry ruefully, that I dislike the way you reduce us all to a general common denominator. Miss Marple shook her head sadly. Human nature is very much the same anywhere, Sir Henry. Sir Henry said distastefully, Mr. Harbottle, Mr. Badger, and poor Conway, I hate to intrude the personal note, but have you any parallel for my humble self in your village? Well, of course, there's Briggs. Who's Briggs? He said he was the head gardener up at Old Hall. Quite the best man they ever had. Knew exactly when the under gardeners were slacking off. Quite uncanny it was. He managed with only 3 men and a boy, and the place was kept better than it had been with 6. And took several first with his with his sweet peas. He's retired now, like me," said Sir Henry, "but he still does a little jobbing if he likes the people." "Ah, said Sir Henry, "again like me. That's what I'm doing now, jobbing to help an old friend." "Two old friends, too?" Sir Henry looked a little puzzled. Miss Marple said, "I suppose you meant Mr. Jefferson, but I wasn't thinking of him. I was thinking of the Colonel and Mrs. Bantry." Yes, I see," he said sharply. "Was that why you alluded to Dolly Bantry as poor dear at the beginning of our conversation?" "Yes, she hasn't begun to realize things yet, I know, because I've had more experience. You see, Sir Henry, it seems to me that there's a great possibility of this crime being the kind of crime that never does get solved, like the Brighton trunk murders. But if that happens, it will be absolutely disastrous for the Bantrys. Colonel Bantry, like nearly all retired military men, is really abnormally sensitive. He reacts very quickly to public opinion. He won't notice it for some time, and then it will begin to go home to him. A slight here and a snub there, and invitations that are refused, and excuses that are made, and then little by little it will dawn upon him, and he'll retire into his shell and get terribly morbid and miserable. Let me be sure I understand you rightly, Miss Marple. You mean that because the body was found in his house, people will think that he had something to do with it?" "Of course they will. I've no doubt they're saying so already. They'll say no more. They'll say so more and more, and people will cold shoulder the Bantrys and avoid them. That's why the truth has got to be found out, and why I was willing to come here with Mrs. Bantry. An open accusation is one thing, and quite easy for a soldier to meet. He's indignant, and he has had a chance of fighting. But this other whispering business will break him, will break them both. So you see, Sir Henry, we've just got to find out the truth." Sir Henry said, "Any ideas as to why the body should have been found in his house?" "There must be an explanation of that, some connection." "Oh, of course. The girl was last seen here about 20 minutes to 11. By midnight, according to the medical evidence, she was dead. Gossington's about 18 miles from here. Good road for 16 of those miles until one turns off the main road. A powerful car could do it in well under half an hour. Practically any car could average 35. But why anybody should either kill her here and take her body out to Gossington, or should take her out to Gossington and strangle her there, I don't know." "Of course you don't, because it didn't happen." "Do you mean that she was strangled by some fellow who took her out in a car? He then decided to push her into the first likely house in the neighborhood?" "I don't think anything of the kind. I think there was a very careful plan made. What happened was that the plan went wrong." Sir Henry stared at her. "Why did the plan go wrong?" Miss Marple said rather apologetically, "Such curious things happen, don't they? If I were to say that this particular plan went wrong because human beings are so much more vulnerable and sensitive than anyone thinks, it would sound sensible, would it? It wouldn't sound sensible, would it? But that's what I believe." And she broke off. Here's Mrs. Bantry now. And that's it for chapter 8. So hopefully we'll get to the next chapter tomorrow. Hope you're enjoying. Have a lovely day. I'm not live today, but I'll be around. Oh, It's Thursday, so Dana, Triple C, Creatively Created Crochet, will have her making meet at 5:30, and the crotchety clogger, my little sis, should be on now because it's after 4. That was my alarm that went off. I didn't check to see what time it was when I sat down to do this. The crotchety clogger's on from 4 to 5, and then Dana, Creatively Created Crochet, from 5:30 to 8, and then Sandy Left is Right. Sometimes Rosalie Yarn It Out, and Mimi Cat Do. So, a good lineup tonight. See you tomorrow at 5, or over at Dana's if you're there. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Bye-bye.